The Back to the Future movies are classics that have been going strong for over 35 years. So for today, I thought it'd be fun to rank all of the movies in the trilogy from the worst to the best. And to be clear, none of these movies are bad, they are all some of my favourite movies of all time. It's just out of my personal enjoyment. And it's really hard to rank these films because the Back to the Future trilogy almost feels like it's one big movie, so it's just out of how much I enjoyed each film. With all of that out of the way, let's get into the ranking. In last place, we have Back to the Future Part 3. The final installment of these movies may be my least favourite out of all three films, but it is still an incredible and entertaining movie. The film takes the characters to the Wild West, and we get to see how Hill Valley used to look 100 years ago, and how the characters have to adapt to this new environment. The concept is really good, and the stakes are really high for the characters because there are just so many problems that are set up in the previous film and at the beginning, and that leads to a very good payoff later in the film. The movie has a bit of everything. It has some action, adventure, comedy, romance, and sci fi, making it a really fun film. In the two previous films, Marty has always been the plot device that drives the movies and the problems, and all of these problems he got himself into, he has to try and get out of. But in this movie, they change it up. Instead, it's Doc who is the one who's the plot device because he keeps falling in love, and he's considering if he should stay in 1885. So the roles kind of switch, where Marty is the more responsible one, and he's just trying to get back to the future. So that was really interesting to see their roles kind of reverse. The ending to this film is one of the most gripping, action packed finales to a film, and the series to that matter, and it managed to give that bittersweet ending, and it manages to tie up all three films really nicely. The reason why this movie is in last place is because I've never been a big fan of westerns, and this movie has a bit more of a slower pace to it, considering if you've just come off the last film, which is action packed. But besides that, this film is really good and it gives a satisfying conclusion to the Back to the Future trilogy. At number 2, we have Back to the Future. The original film still holds up as being one of the best films of all time. This film at the time was groundbreaking and it still holds up to today's standards. In Hollywood now, there's always just so much green screen and CGI, and back in the 80s, that wasn't something they could rely on as much. So it's amazing how they were able to pull it off with the technology at the time, considering the length that it took to get this movie made. Is just absolutely mind-blowing. The concept of this film is really clever, and it asks the question, what if a teenager travelled back 30 years into the past and met his parents and got to see what they were like at his age? That in itself is just such a clever idea to explore. And we get to see Marty, the main character, have to deal with all these problems, and he keeps mucking up the past and causing more problems to solve, leading to some pretty memorable, funny scenes in the film. With the way that this whole film is set up and executed and laid out, it's just a perfect example of a film that is basically flawless. If that's with its well thought out story and very good acting that sets up so many careers for so many amazing actors and actresses, it's considered one of the best films of all time, and for good reason. This film is very iconic, and that is most likely because of its 80s references and 50s references, making the movie massive in pop culture. This was the first ever film I reviewed on my channel, and to be honest, my opinion regarding this film hasn't changed that much. I don't really have any reasoning for this film being the runner-up. It's one of my favourite films of all time. It's so well made, but it's not as good as at number 1, Back to the Future Part 2. This is a movie that is able to keep you gripped from very beginning to very end. There is never a moment in this movie where nothing happens. There is always something happening that builds the story and the stakes. I think the reason why this is my favourite Back to the Future movie is simply because it's a movie that is just so action-packed. With the other Back to the Future movies, they always stay in the same time period for the majority of the movie, but in this film they travel to multiple time periods. They start off travelling to the year 2015, and we get to see this version of the future that is just so bright and colourful, and we get to see all the cool things they thought might be around in the future, like hoverboards, flying cars, and lots of other cool little gimmicks. But it's also funny to see what the future might have looked like as well. And you thought this would have made the film feel really outdated, considering we have passed the year 2015. But it still doesn't. I just love the way the characters get to see the future and what they grow up to be. It's just really cool. But they don't spend the whole movie in the future. They then travel to an alternate 1985, and they explore the idea of multiple timelines. and how the littlest of things can affect the future massively. And that was really cool idea to explore in this trilogy of films. And then they travel to the year 1955, and we get to see the events of the first movie play out from a different angle and the same story told from a different view. And I thought that was really cool to watch. It manages to raise the stakes from this film massively from the first one and give a more thrilling film. Sure, it might have some mistakes in it, and it might have a few flaws, and it might not be as perfect as the first movie, but this movie is just a lot of fun. I know a lot of people don't like how they travel to multiple places in this movie, but I just love how the movie takes an unexpected turn halfway through and goes in ways that you don't really expect it to. It follows on really nicely from the first one and sets up the premise of the sports almanac, which causes all of the problems throughout the film, because that is what the film is centered around and that drives the plot forward. It manages to misdirect you in so many ways, and that leads to a really entertaining film. I know everyone says that The Empire Strikes Back is the best sequel of all time, but I don't know if anyone gives this film much thought anymore, because this film is seriously underrated. Overall, with its fun storyline and plot twists, this movie keeps you gripped all the way through, and that's why Back to the Future Part 2 is at number 1. So that's my ranking of the Back to the Future trilogy. Comment down below what your ranking is of the Back to the Future movies, because my ranking isn't the right ranking, it's just my opinion, and I'd love to see what you think of this trilogy of films, because I find that everyone ranks these movies very differently. But thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and give this video a big thumbs up if you want to see more videos like this one, and I'll see you next Friday.